Welcome, everybody, to our December Talks on Tuesday. We're glad you are joining us. As you are getting in and getting settled, please feel free to go ahead and type in chat where you are joining us from. We love to know who's participating and what parts of the state or other states are joining us. So we can go to the next slide, please. Our topic today is families moving from resilience to recharge, and we're going to have Dana Yarbrough from the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth, who is going to do a little bit more of an introduction to herself in just a moment. But I wanted to let you all know, many of you know that Seth is our technology guru and he is out sick. So I want to give a special thanks to Lisa Terry, who is going to be assisting with all of the behind the scenes. We'll be using chat. We'll be using some polls. We're actually going to try a new tool called Jamboard. And if you have any trouble with technology, first of all, you can always use chat. If you can't participate in the polls, you can put your answers. We'll be keeping up with that. But also feel free to message Lisa and she will try to help you as much as she can too. So we will go ahead and dive in. Thanks. I'm seeing everybody putting where they're from, and I appreciate that. So Dana, I'm going to put myself on mute and turn it over to you. And thank you for presenting for us.
Thank you, Corey. And I'm excited to be here today with you all. As Corey said, the topic of today's talks on Tuesday is around this idea of resilience, family resilience in particular, and how we can rethink family resilience and this addition of the time for recharging. So you're going to learn more about that, and we're going to talk more about that as we move along in this next hour. So you'll see on this screen some of the professional titles, a few of them that I hold. I do work, as Corey said, at Virginia Commonwealth University. I work at the Partnership for People with Disabilities. And one of the areas I particularly spend a lot of my time in is with the Center for Family Involvement. And you'll hear a little bit about that in a short period of time. I also, what brings me really most to this work around family support and family resilience is my own personal wisdom and experience raising my daughter, Brooke, who's now in her mid-20s. Brooke was born at 28 weeks gestation and has been diagnosed with things like cortical blindness, intellectual disabilities, cerebral palsy, epilepsy. And despite her significant cognitive delays and the full-time support needs that Brooke has, she opened up a dog boarding business the day she exited high school with a IEP diploma. She has about 50 four-legged clients. And in addition to Brooke, I have siblings who have disabilities. I was a caretaker for my parents as they aged, including my mother who had Alzheimer's. So I kind of was in this multi-layered sandwich. I rarely had time for myself. I think I was a defender of my siblings from the bullies. I was a family problem solver often. I was the executor of my parents' estates. And then certainly Brooke's advocate for a long time. And so I have my own personal experiences with this, with what I assumed was resilience. And I'm now rethinking what I thought was resilience. And hopefully you will too, as we talk further this morning or this afternoon. So there's been decades of research on family resilience, and it's really being reimagined in the light of the pandemic. We hear resilience a lot during the pandemic. And so this discussion is going to take a look at family resilience, look at the ways families can recharge as they apply their strengths and beliefs, so that they can be more hopeful for the future and more confident that they can manage life changes. So here's what we'll review. But let's first take a moment to ground ourselves in a common definition of resilience, and it comes from Oxford English. Just take a moment to read what's on the screen. And it really comes from this idea of needing to be tough. This idea of bouncing back, to come out of the other side after facing adversity. I think our ability to be resilient is constantly changing, and what is an adverse event to me may not be adversive to one of you. You'll note at the end of the definition this word elasticity, and people often think of resilience being graphically represented by rubber bands, or maybe stretching ourselves. You kind of stretch out of shape and you spring back into shape. I don't know about you, but over my lifetime, I have stretched a lot of rubber bands to their breaking point. And that really is kind of the purpose, I think, of today's conversation. So now I want you to take a moment to read the definition on the screen. There isn't one definition of family resilience, but many experts and researchers will point to the work of Froma Walsh and her 2016 book on family resilience. And these are the words that Froma Walsh uses to define family resilience: functional systems, social contexts, positive adaptation, strengthening the family unit. And now I want you to read this definition of family resilience. So there's really nothing wrong with the previous definition, but it was difficult to understand by families, and it's about families. This definition was developed by some of the families I work with at the Center for Family Involvement, who represent Arabic, Latinx, African American, and Asian cultures. We spent several months just really taking apart this Froma Walsh's definition, understanding what she meant by those words. What were the concepts of resilience from their cultural perspectives? And one of the things they first said was this not in plain language. The definition was very difficult to understand. So this was the final definition that we developed. So I would ask, are there any words that stand out to you? So use the chat. You have the chat, as Corey mentioned, we'll be using. So if there were words in here that really stand out to you, put those in the chat. So I see someone wrote more hopeful, managing, transitions and thinking about them positively. This idea of adapting together. I see beliefs and hopes. Thank you for sharing some of those. I think absolutely for me, this idea of hope, really this one around confidence and building our confidence, and perhaps most importantly, the words I see is how families define and experience family. So it's they define families, we don't define families. And that's really important as we begin to move further through the discussion around resilience, and how sometimes our own implicit bias can come right to the forefront when we have a definition of family in our head and in our own belief system. And so we need to take a step back and really ask families how, and ask children particularly, how they define family, who's in the family internally and externally. So this graphic, some of you may have seen this graphic. It was first represented, it first appeared during the pandemic. It came out about a year ago from the Center on the Developing Child. We changed a few of the boxes today, so we did give credit because we adapted a couple of the boxes for this presentation. So I wanted to give them credit. And I think it's fair to say that we can all agree that healthy development depends on the quality and the reliability of a child's relationships with those most important people in their life. Again, how they define their family, both within and outside of their family, who those people are. So as we continue to explore this concept around resilience, this graphic shows it as being a seesaw or a balanced scale, where there could be negative outcomes or experiences that can tip the scale towards less positive outcomes. And then you can have positive experiences on the other side, which can tip you towards better, or good outcomes. So you can think of this about this balance between the challenges in our lives and the internal and external resources that we have to face them. So one of the ways we can think about trying to balance the scale is to build up more strength, to build positive resilience. So we could do that by unloading some of the things on the negative side. So are there some things we could do to reduce some less than positive experiences, some stress that are on the what would be considered the kind of the negative side? So does anyone want to share in the chat an example of how you might help a family unload that negative side? What might be something we could do to take some boxes off that side of the seesaw? Vaccines. I see someone commenting around vaccines that can help maybe reduce the number of hospitalizations. Are there other ideas of how we might be able to help unload? Finding childcare, so helping a family navigate some community resources to access childcare. Listening. I appreciate that, Susan. Just really listening to what's going on, what they've tried. Looking for financial assistance. Yeah. What keeps them up at night? And in that kind of spirit of compassion that you're there. You may not be able to solve everything, but you're there to listen and support them. You know, I think we can think about also helping families meet basic needs. Some of you mentioned childcare. There could be finding diapers. We know there was a formula shortage, and so helping families think about how to access some of those much needed resources. Maybe it's internet access. Maybe it's connecting them to those community programs. It's the financial assistance, which we saw. We've heard some organizations have developed activity kits. So maybe there's some crayons or coloring books, some craft activities that their child or children could do that just gives the family a little bit of break, even if it's 20 minutes to take a step away, or 30 minutes and their children are occupied with something. And encouraging the practices of self-care, again, even if it's just a few minutes for themselves. So there's a couple other ways we can do this. And on the screen, you'll see some examples of how to do the opposite, how we can kind of overload the positive side. So what can we bring to the family that we can do to kind of start pushing that scale back down, so it's not so heavily weighted on one side. And so, you know, we could think of resilience kind of like an umbrella. We can think that it might not stop the downpour completely, but it does help you keep it somewhat dry, and you have to keep shifting it around as the wind or the rain changes direction. So these three examples are not ones that I'm endorsing over anybody else's. I'm going to be honest. I did a Google search a while ago, and these were three that I saw come up a lot. And I've heard other people share these as resources in the past. So again, they're just three examples. Many of the original resilience models and the training that was provided to families came from a place of families are stressed and they need to learn coping skills, goal setting and coping skills. And so they were very much about bringing people together to teach them a skill set. And I think we've shifted a little bit from that model, but these are still fairly relevant. So Focus was one that was developed through some military representatives. And it really is coming together for about 6 or 7 or 8 sessions. So families come, and it is about helping them rewrite their story, rebuild their own story about their life. It's about reframing it. Thinking of the events in their life and looking at them from a negative perspective and a positive perspective, trying to make meaning out of a sense of order or control when life is when life does feel out of control and it feels chaotic. So they go multiple sessions and they rewrite their stories, learn some skills. The community resilience model in the middle is a little bit different. It is a model where people come for a whole day. So you devote to going a whole day, spending time. There may be other people in the room, other families in the room. And it really promotes this idea of well-being, mental health and emotional well-being. in the face of ongoing stress. So they have a lot of different bits of information they share. People practice. They have maybe worksheets. So, and they get to have some peer support, because it can be a little therapeutic having people in similar experiences being in the room with you. Building Your Bounce is fairly new. This was developed right about the beginning of COVID. They had the Devereaux Center was developing a brand new series of sessions for families, and they had to switch everything over to virtual because they were intended to be in person. So they have developed some webinars, some short videos. They have reflective readings that participants can watch. They have can read and watch. They have some activities to do. They ask you to do journaling about your thoughts, your ideas. And it's really focused on adults taking care of themselves first and then their child. And so it's that you think about being on an airplane, and they always run through the spiel at the beginning of if oxygen masks come down, make sure you get it on yourself first and make sure you're ready. So then you can help the person next to you or your child. So it's that same thing about really thinking about self-care for families. What are these positive processes that families can build into their routines? So we do have links of these in the chat. We also have them as a handout for the session. But one of my favorite ways of really thinking about how to tip that side of that seesaw or that balance to the positive side is really the parent-to-parent model of supporting parents. It's been around since the 1970s, so it's not new. It was parents sitting across the kitchen table and just sharing similar experiences. And out of that grew programs of parent-to-parent across the whole country in communities, at state levels. Virginia has had programs since the 1970s. Big Stone Gap was our very first parent-to-parent program, and we continue to have those supports in place in Virginia. And it really is this intentional matching of a parent with a peer mentor. So parents are recruited who are like seasoned. I wouldn't call them old or veteran parents, but maybe they're seasoned parents who have some experience, and they're trained and prepared on how to mentor and support another parent. So they there's this real perceived sameness, like you've walked in my shoes, your experience is similar to mine. And it has been really important in the world of early childhood. Ann Turnbull and other notable researchers and authors have been writing about parent-to-parent support since the 1990s. The Bright Futures Guidelines for the American Academy of Pediatrics in early 2000s added parent-to-parent support as one of the steps that pediatricians should do when a child is receiving a diagnosis. So we have investments from some bigwigs, some big important people in the field, and the American Academy of Pediatrics to say this idea: don't always think about just formal supports and services. Make sure that families have access to informal supports and services. And for when Brooke was born, she lived in the hospital most of the first 2 years, and I just couldn't imagine always the long-term future. It was enough to get through the day or the hour. And it wasn't until I had access to parent support, it literally became a lifesaver for me. It opened up, for some reason, this permission for me to hope and to think about the future. It provided me a different way of looking at things, and with some skills of how to organize myself and our family and what we needed to do next. And so, not all of us can purchase resources, and we know not everyone can afford resources. So I really hope that we can be more intentional about thinking about the emotional trauma that families may be experiencing, where parent-to-parent support can really be vital. And so I mentioned about this being a lifesaver for me, this idea of a parent supporting me through this. And I mentioned some skills. And one of the skills that a family really, another parent helped me was thinking about how to network. Not to think that there would be formal systems that would support every single child with a special need or a disability. And so I needed to make sure that I was treating Brooke as though I would treat other children in the family, and think about what are those natural supports that we all look to, Little Leagues and Brownies and Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts. And are there things that we can do to begin to network and build a community for Brooke? Other parents said, Do you know how to read and understand these reports you're getting about your child that people have done, they've used the ages and stages or other types of evaluation tools and screening tools? Do I understand the chart or the graphs or the report that comes back to me? So really had to become a data analyst to really understand. So you'll see this is a graphic that comes from Carnegie, where they did a document several years ago around the next generation of supporting families. And what I love about this graphic is parent-to-parent support. And we as professionals supporting parents can help families recognize these vital roles that they're already playing. Some of them, they may need to learn these roles. Some of them, they may absolutely be doing all of these and more. So I want you to think about, take a moment and think, and if you'd be comfortable sharing in the chat, maybe there's a time when you helped a family recognize one of these roles. And if so, and you don't mind putting in the chat what role that was or something about that story, please feel free to. I'll give folks a minute to type some things in. I don't want to move on yet in case someone has a great example. I see Corey mentions as an advocate. So she supported a family when they were in the school system and really helped them see their role in being an advocate for their son. So helping them recognize that role and what that looks like. If you have another one, feel free to share. I am going to move on in the interest of, oh, I have one more before we move on. Coaching. So just this morning, helping parents see how all this repetition during book sharing is paying off. So really seeing that their role as teachers and as learners themselves and then as teachers, co-learners. So several of these roles pop up probably in there. And then I see one about just really constantly saying to families the strengths that they have, the strengths of their child, because they're often talking about weaknesses. And we see that, we hear that a lot in the early years, where that's a lot of what you're hearing during the diagnostic process. And so you begin to see that as families can retell that story and begin to shift about the positives. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So we mentioned that this idea of family support, parent-to-parent support. So I want to just briefly mention too, there are a lot of family support organizations in our state. We're lucky. We have a lot of autism, Down syndrome association groups, genetic specific organizations. There are support groups. Some of your own early intervention programs may be housed within a community service board or some agency which provides some type of support group for families that may be disability specific or not. These two on the screen are statewide, and they both often partner together to really work on some early childhood related projects. And they do refer families who call in to other disability specific and local support organizations and groups. So if you're not familiar with New Path at the Arc of Virginia, they've been supported in part by the state Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia to make sure that families have access to support to navigate early intervention services. They have virtual support groups. They can help families understand IFSPs and the transition process to those special education or Part B services and many other things. And then the Center for Family Involvement at VCU, which is where I'm located, we are Virginia's federally recognized family-to-family health information center, and we are recognized as the state parent-to-parent program in Virginia. And our Center for Family Involvement has funding from the majority of the state agencies: aging and rehabilitative services, health, behavioral health and developmental services, and education, to really provide emotional, informational, and systems navigational support one-on-one to families of infants all the way through adults who have intellectual or developmental disabilities or special healthcare needs. So we do have handouts in one of the resources. There's a QR code. There's a one pager that has the QR code of how to access these. But we also want to stop and do a quick poll and ask if you have referred families to either one of these, or maybe it's a different organization, or maybe none of these. So if you could just jump into that poll on your screen and do an anonymous survey for us.
Dana, and I did want to mention while folks are completing the poll, we have been working really hard through the VEIPD to really help service coordinators in particular, but also other practitioners to really understand New Path and the Center for Family Involvement and our coordination and collaboration. So I just wanted to be sure if you didn't see what I posted if people didn't see what I posted in chat, that has been a primary goal recently.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we hear it often that parents will say, I never heard about the ARC or the Center for Family Involvement or the Autism Society of Northern Virginia, or, people. And so this is, again, we're not tagging anyone if they haven't referred to these organizations. We want to continue to spread the word that they are there. They are free resources to families. They operate just a teeny bit differently, but they both are very passionate about supporting families. So thank you for that. And again, you can access that resource with those QR codes, and you can make copies of that. You can text that. We have it as an image. We can make sure you can text it out to families or post it on things. Let us know how we can help you advertise this resource. So before we kind of move into the leaving resilience and moving into this idea of recharge, I did want to point out just a couple things for us to consider as supporters of families. We are all invested in their resilience for their own sake and for their child's. So while this idea of the new normal, I've been hearing it a lot during COVID. What's the new normal after COVID or during COVID? And so people are really starting to use this word. But the reality is this idea of the new normal and these words have been used in the disability community for as long as I can remember. And it really describes that moment following a diagnosis that your child or loved one has a disability. Maybe it's a lifelong disability. Some of you may have read the Welcome to Holland poem by Emily Kingsley. There's one called Celebrating Holland, I Am Home, that Kathy Anthony wrote after Emily. And then later, Susan Rusidlo wrote one called Welcome to Beirut. So hers was a different take on the Welcome to Holland. So there's been 3 of these that have been out, and we can post those links in the chat for those who have not seen those before. But each one of those kind of verbalize the new normal in their own way and the resilience that it takes to adjust to life with disability in that family. It's about learning new languages. It's about adjusting dreams. And we know that parent-to-parent support can be really helpful because, again, people have walked in their shoes. It shows parents that are new to disability what the real world life changes are that people make in their lives to adjust to this new normal. So first, I just wanted to mention new normal. Second, I wanted to have us really consider during this concept of family resilience and the new normal that supporting children with developmental delays, developmental disabilities, healthcare needs can be lifelong. So it's really important that we pace ourselves and we train as if it's a marathon and not a sprint. Parents have to remember that they're in this for the long haul. We know that there can be ups and downs. There's the fear of what's to come. We don't want families to view each stress or a stressor as a crisis or every system as their child ages as though it's a fight, because then people just get bogged down surviving crisis after crisis. We don't want to have to be experts in everything. We are experts in our children about their favorite things, about their development, about their the things they dream about. And some of us might have professional expertise because we have backgrounds from our schooling, our profession, but it just gets exhausting if we don't pace ourselves. And that pacing brings me to this another concept of wearing a super cape. Families can be dealing with disability issues for a long time, and we might be doing it by the skin of our teeth. we begin to think of ourselves as these resilient superheroes. And when I mentioned at the beginning that I was in this multi-layered sandwich, I can attest to this. As an advocate for my daughter, I became used to wearing my super cape. My super cape was invisible to others, but it was really a facade of everything that I told myself that I had to be. When I was wearing it, I was more patient. I was more organized. I was more well-read. I knew special education law forwards and backwards. I read the Medicaid long-term services regulations. I wore my super cape as a deflector shield when I went to meetings, so I could handle anything that was said that may have been negative about Brooke. When Brooke was an infant and we had therapists coming in and nurses into our house, it was just prior to natural environments. So they did come in the house. We were also going into the community service board. But those days when they were at our house, I was like, I got to get out and mow the lawn. I have to clean the windows. Brooke and the dog need to be all sparkly clean. I had like snacks. It was this facade of saying I was holding it together, and inside I was absolutely crumbling. But to the external world, I did not want them to know that I could not handle how to support this young child with lots of complex needs. And so I think maybe you're recognizing this in yourself. Maybe you recognize this in some of the families. Maybe you didn't realize that this was a super cape phenomenon. But there really is something real about this resilience fatigue, about maintaining this super cape all the time. I came to realize that I can't wear it all the time, but I also can't just burn it and throw it away, because I love Brooke and she is worthy of the best of my effort, all that I have to offer all the time. But maybe I could leave it in the closet a little bit more often. Brooke loves me because I am perfectly imperfect. So I don't have to wear the super cape every day. And to be honest, it was exhausting running around as though my tank was on full all the time. It was beginning to affect my body and my health and relationship with people in my life. So when we wear our super capes, we have to often, we have our pedal to the metal all the time. When you got your super cape on, you're just in a mode, you're pedal to the metal. You are flooring it, that gas pedal. You hear things, you fear things, you go into fight or flight. We can run out of gas and we can shut down. We might slam on the brakes and stop everything because we're overwhelmed at the moment. Sometimes people think a parent is in denial when actually they could be in fight or flight mode. And our body has this really cool autonomic nervous system. And within that nervous system, there are two subsystems, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we're trying to do work, when a parent is in fight or flight mode, it's just not going to work. If you're stepping on the gas all the time, that sympathetic system kicks in. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our breathing speeds up, our muscles get all tense, fat and sugar get released as energy to our muscles. That could cause people to be trembly. Sometimes sweating occurs. That's because our body's cooling down and it's making it harder to grab us if we're attacked. Our pupils can dilate, making it easier for light to enter. We can see threats. We can begin to have a dry mouth. We can have blood vessels. If you've noticed like a pink skin on the face or the chest, that can be a reaction. It's causing our face to redden because of our blood vessels opening wider. So how do we find this balance between tromping on the gas all the time and slamming on the brakes? How do we get to that parasympathetic response that requires that we slow down, that we rest, that we don't rush through meals, that we set aside time to actually enjoy the smell and the taste of the food that we're eating? We need that recovery period, or it will stop resiliency in its tracks. We will eventually just snap that rubber band I mentioned earlier. So this is what's going to bring me to what we often don't talk about related to family resilience, and that's that need to recharge. But before we go, we want you to take a quick poll to think about these things. I talked about the new normal, the marathon, not the sprint, the super capes, the fight or flight. Just anonymously share in the poll. Have you thought about these? Do you sometimes think about these? Have you really never thought about these at all? And then in the chat, if you feel safe and comfortable and you want to provide a reflection, and an aha moment, something about one of these concepts that really strikes you and you want to share something. We started off strong with thinking about it all the time, but now thinking about the sometime is in the lead. And again, feel free to share if there is an aha moment or reflection. Maybe you've met a family who just volunteers for everything. They're out running around. They want to be on every committee. They are, they want to learn as much as they can. They go to every training, every conference, everything they can do. Maybe you've even talked to a family about their wearing a super cape, that it seems like they're wearing those deflector shields. Maybe you stopped a meeting because you saw a family in fight or flight. And I see a comment in here about not jumping to assumptions about where the family is. And I think that's so true. I think as I look back on my wearing the super cape, I wonder what that projected to the people around me and around Brooke. Was I like some superhero, some super mom? Did it show something mistakenly that I was not trying to portray? So if you feel comfortable, please continue to use the chat to share. So I want to move into this idea of recharging. And here is a definition from the Oxford English, just similar to the one for resilience using Oxford English. Here's one for recharge. So just take a moment and read the words on the screen. So in light of what I've just shared, I think of recharging as being filling my well. Looking at my phone battery at 20%, and how do I get it up to 90% or higher energy level and battery level? So it's kind of getting back up in that battery level. I want to point out too, this concept of resilience fatigue that I mentioned is not new, but again, the pandemic has really put a spotlight on it. This exhaustion from wearing our super capes, this acting motivated and positive all the time, keeping smiling, showing how tough we are. And I think that's where I started this session, was saying that as a caretaker for my siblings, my daughter, and my parents, I just pulled up my bootstraps. I did what had to be done. I somewhat probably was like a robot. It's just ingrained that I needed to do this. And I want us to think about, as we leave in a short period of time from here today, to think about resilience in this different light, about allowing ourselves to fully feel and experience and process emotions so we can effectively pick up the pieces and move forward productively. We just can't shut off our emotions. That really isn't true resilience. So this graphic really is just a reminder that, earlier resilience is defined as a noun. It's the sense of and the state of being, and recharge is really defined through being a verb. It's this act of doing. So if you remember back to your high school days, your middle school days, what a noun and a verb do. And so to me, this is a continual reminder for me if I want to be in the state of resilience, I need to continue to recharge. And it's my responsibility. It's a continual action of recharge. So I want to, I shared some ideas earlier around this idea of supporting families and resilience through like the trainings and through parent-to-parent support. But we can build in routines in our interactions with families that include this attention to resilience recharging. I had someone tell me one day that I just needed to tell myself every morning that I can't do it all. Look in the mirror and say, I can't do it all, and then follow through by not doing it all. But when you're a parent, It's really hard. You can't step away completely from your responsibilities, but there are ways to set limits. So instead, my mantra became what I must do versus what I should do. And I think each one of us may have a separate list of what's on my must-do list and what's on my should-do list. So to preserve energy, I first focus on those things that I must do. And I may or may not get to those things that I should do. And I have to let some of that anxiety go that I didn't get to all of those. So if we want to be like really build our resilience muscles, we need to think about a person's belief systems. How do they make meaning of the events in their life? Do they have a positive outlook? Do they rely on spiritual support? Maybe we need to think about their organizational processes. So are they adaptable? Are they people who are comfortable with change or being flexible? Can things be somewhat unclear? Are they isolated? Do they have connections to others in their family and in their community? Are they pretty resourceful or not so resourceful in meeting needs? And then we can think about their problem solving and communication. Again, are they, does everything have to be really clear? Are they okay with a little bit of grayness in there? Are they open to collaborating and negotiating? And so then armed with all that information, we can really help families begin to think about how to pause before they react. So resilience can require us to take a step back, just think about everything that's going on and use all of those senses: emotion, financial, physical, spiritual, and use all of our senses and really think about what is most important. What is that must do? What's that biggest tension or pressure points? That weak link, what is that? And then respond. Sometimes we rush in and we haven't thought about the ripple effect. So maybe if we had pulled this string instead, it might have lessened the ripple effect, or it might have collapsed 3 of those boxes on that negative side of the scale with just one action. Then families should reflect on the response that they chose. What worked? What could have been done differently? And then adapt as needed in the future. But absolutely, they have to stop to recover, that rest period. We have to continue when we're building this resilience muscle, that we must continually rest and recharge. So can we pay attention to spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional energy? That can be done by taking walks, by taking deep breaths, putting your phone and computer away for blocks of time each day, doing something you enjoy each week. So this is where we want to turn to you, and we want you to help us build some strategies that can work with families every day, that can be used as a takeaway for you. So I know some of you have some really tried and true innovative ways that you recharge, and we want to leave here today committed to helping other families recharge. So this is where we're going to pop into a Jamboard, and we'll put the link in the chat box, and I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to reshare the new link to the Jamboard. And again, we have supports if you have not used a Jamboard before.
Dana, while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and jump in. So Jamboards are new for our talks on Tuesday. We hope this is going to be a good tool or ideas after you all give some strategies. We hope to collect those strategies. I did also want to draw attention. Janine Vassar put a really cool comment in chat about how they have a phrase in their family that is like, don't do the shoulds, but do the coulds. So check out that in chat if you haven't noticed. And so I see people already. There are notes on screen, but you click the note icon on the left-hand menu, right where Dana is pointing. And then you will get a sticky note, and you can choose the color of your sticky note that you like, and go ahead and think about some recharging strategies that you use for your, Dana, this one is about for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Things that you do to recharge yourself. And Lisa has noted, if you have any trouble, be sure you could put it in chat, and one of us can help get up it on the screen too.
So again, we'll just take a moment to have you put, like, what are your favorite go-tos for recharging? I see some really cool ones in here: exercising, giving yourself grace, yoga, great for mindfulness and meditation, apps that have, there are lots of apps out there which have some great music or meditation. Music. If this screen gets full, there's a second screen, a second page. So you can just click at the top where it says page 1, page 2. And if this one starts to get full, just feel free to pop over. But I love these ideas. So here you are saying about what you'd like to do to recharge. Dance parties. I do those with my daughter, Brooke. We sometimes I'll pop by her room and she'll have some cool old classic rock music playing or some new getting jiggy with it or some fun song, and we just stop and we just start bopping around her room. So thank you. I see some great podcasting and committing to do something, even if it's 10 minutes a day. So now we want you to go to the third page. So if you click at the top, there's some left and right arrows. You would click to page 3. And this is where we now say, what are you going to do now? Thinking about the families that you work with, the families you support, the families you come in contact each day, each week. What is something that you would commit to doing tomorrow, today, next week that helps them recharge? Maybe you're going to come up with a go-to question. You're going to ask this family every time you meet with them. You're going to ask them this question: what have you done to recharge this week? I'm going to pause. I see one on the screen. I'm going to pause at my visit and ask the caregivers how they are doing. How have they taken care of themselves? So being real intentional about building this in to your routines in your work with families and children. Again, not what you're going to do, but what you are going to do to assist families. So you're going to make this part of your routine with every family. No judgments with some families or others, just every family. And remember, these are all anonymous. Some people are penguins, some people are squirrels, some people are buffaloes. So we don't know who you are. So I see some around at the end of each visit, there's some joint planning time. So making sure that there is, or maybe at the beginning. And so making sure that there's some recharging routine added. That's awesome. So taking a moment to actually model recharging and having them come up with something that's going to be doable in their life. The deep breathing, absolutely. Talking about the super capes. So going back and thinking about your interactions that you've had with families, and maybe you're like, now that I look back at this, maybe this wasn't a denial, or maybe this wasn't grief, or I don't know what it was. Maybe it was part of a super cape and a protection. So I need to explore that further. What other routines or things might you put in? And again, you can put them in the chat if you need to. We can cut and paste that. Do you have a go-to question you want to ask? Maybe pop in that.
You know, Dana, I think that matches really well if folks have ideas with all of the work we've done with coaching and open-ended questions. Is there one that maybe you use that you can share with other people? Kim says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your recharge tank? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and someone posted in green about sharing resources. So might those maybe a little bit further, I would ask, and maybe this could be posted by anybody in the chats or on another sticky, are those resources specific to taking care of yourself, like caretaking resources? Are they parent-to-parent supports? So you can edit that sticky and add a few examples, or you can just put a new sticky in there or in the chats. Just a little more specificity around maybe a resource you might share. I love this, even during like an intake. And during family assessments, really building this in and having an intentional conversation around the marathon, not the sprint. And so kind of how are people building in time for themselves? And what does that look like with no judgments? That everyone's idea we saw on these earlier screens, everyone has their own. I might not be a podcaster, I might be someone who listens to music instead. So whatever those are, that, you know, again, we just want to get families to really be thinking about this concept of not drying their well out and that their battery doesn't get down to 10%. Tell families about all the links and training shared today. So great. I'll just add a little bit of that on there. What is one activity that really helps you recharge? So asking them what we just did a few slides ago, what are the things that you like to do? And maybe you haven't had time to do it. So how can you build that in? How could you find time? Like, you know, again, sometimes as moms or dads, we think we can do it all. We don't want to ask others for help. People offer help, or we're like, oh, no, they're just being nice. They really don't know how to support my child. Or I'm afraid I want to bubble wrap my child. And I'm afraid to have someone come in and so I could go sleep for 20 minutes or clean the house or something. And we get, or like me, I had to make sure the lawn's mowed and clean before anyone comes over to the house. Some of these ridiculous things that go in our heads. And, you know, how do we just take a step back and say, I won't do anybody good if I try to do it all. So how can I take a moment to recharge? Because that's my resiliency and my umbrella. Sometimes I have to shift the way the wind is blowing, and sometimes my umbrella is going to blow backwards. You know that when that happens embarrassingly on the street, and you're suddenly your umbrella is completely blown backwards, and you're not covered at all. And we want to make sure that we can cover that, use that umbrella, and try to keep as dry as we can.
Dana, I noticed in chat that Jessica said she was the one who put the share resources, and that she really wants to think about telling families about the links and trainings that you shared, so parents are aware of those resources.
Thank you. And I see Lisa mentioned that it's really hard for families to think of this. So sometimes we may have to share. That's that humility. I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa. I think sometimes as part of our compassionate engagement with families, sometimes we need to throw like a little peel of the onion. We have to peel ourselves back and throw just a little piece back. And maybe we need to sometimes say, maybe they don't realize that you could be also in a caretaking sandwich, and they may not recognize you in that professional role as having some similar experiences. So how can we maybe be willing to throw something out and say, you know, when things are really draining my battery, one of the things I love to do is just 5 minutes, sit in the car and listen to a podcast, or give my children something to do. So I have 20 minutes to do something, or ask my husband, or ask a partner, or ask grandma, ask someone to do something. So I can have, even if it's 15-20 minutes, to dance around the room or whatever it is we want to do. Maybe you like to mow lawn, maybe you like to do laundry, whatever those things are, but just something that just keeps your mind out of where it was, and it makes that intentional break, and you can stop. Well, I thank you for these great ideas. I'm super excited that folks were willing to share. I want you to also be comfortable with sharing in the chats as much as you feel that this is a safe and brave space that you can share. If you have comments, if you have ahas, if you have questions about something. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and first say thank you. This is my contact information. If you want to reach out to me, this will be as part of the materials that will be posted. So you'll be able to get this information later. Some of those handouts will be also included in that posting of today's session. But again, please feel free to use the chat if there's something that you want to share that you had not heard before, or is something you're going to take away, I hope, from those Jamboards. I think what we can do, Corey, is if we can save some of those pages. We may not want all of them, but maybe if we save some of them, we can download those as a PDF, and those can be added as one of the extra resources for today.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. I want to thank everybody. Jamboard was again a new foray for Talks on Tuesday. So thanks for participating. And I want to thank Dana for bringing both her professional and her personal expertise to this topic. We are almost at the end, so I'm going to ask Dana to go to the next slide. Most of you know kind of what happens next. As a reminder, we do not do Talks on Tuesdays during January because it typically hits right after many people's winter breaks. So we just don't do January. We'll be returning in February. And daggone, Lisa, I was supposed to remember what the topic was, but I don't. If you want to drop it in chat, I'm happy to say that. But I know Lisa is going to be the facilitator. Oh, it's on self-care. That's right. It's on self-care with Corey Cassidy and Patty Eitmiller, who some of you may have seen some or went to their session at Creating Connections to Shining Stars. They're going to use some of that content and some fresh content as well. So thank you, Lisa. And we'll be getting that information out to get you all registered shortly after the new year. And we can go to the next slide, please. As a reminder, probably you already have it in your inbox. If you participated with a group, just share that email. Everybody can take the survey, and once you've completed the survey, you will get a link to the certificate that can be used for your ongoing professional development.